One of the favorite memories I have of my mother from my childhood is when we took a long trip, a long bus ride to go to, I forget, I think it was a fishing trip. And I might be making this up, but it was from Seoul to Busan, which is sort of like the capital city to the southern tip, like this southern tip of Korea. And it's about a 3-4 hour ride, I would say, if my memory is correct. And back in the day, they didn't have air conditioning in buses. So whatever the weather was outside, you add another 5 degrees in the inside with the engine heat and, you know, all the heat getting trapped inside the bus is sort of the lot. That's what you have to deal with. And you can sort of mitigate the problem by opening the windows, but sometimes people will tell you to close it. Anyway, on this long bus ride in a hot, muggy summer, I was getting a little bit too hot, and my mom had the window seat, and I was sitting on the inside, and my mom had one of those fans with a little stick, a handheld fan. And she was covering her face with that because she was sitting on the window. And I was getting hot and I was getting sleepy. It was muggy in there and it was kind of droning. So I began to fall asleep on her lap. And when I put my head on her lap, she immediately began to fan me gently to lull me into sleep because bus, like I said, is very hot. And I felt the cool, quote unquote, cool breeze on my face and I fell asleep. And I must have fell asleep for a long time. And when I woke up, I noticed that the fan was hovering over my face. And for whatever duration of the bus ride, she had the fan covering my face so that I would not be sunburned even before I get to the beach. You know, I arrived at the beach with red face. What she has been, and shortly after that, we arrived at the Busan terminal. I don't know if we had train to Busan back then, maybe, but when we arrived, I felt this sense of great gratitude because she was holding the fan over my face for several hours. And she was fanning and covering, and trying to do both things for the almost entire bus ride. And I was very thankful for that. Sometimes what we want in life is comfort. When I ride a bus now, it's well air conditioned. And if I was a kid, if you're a kid now and you take a long bus ride with your mom or your parents, he or she doesn't have to fan you all the way. They can just draw the curtain and it just make sure the nozzle is pointing towards you and everything is fine. But I think what I really want is not so much the comfort, but the relationship that I have with my mom. And that there was someone who cared for me, who covered for me, and who has fanned me through the entire bus ride. And that's one of the memories that I cherish, especially as she wasn't part of my life for the next 6 years because my parents got divorced shortly after that. And you and I live our life wondering, will I want comfort or will I choose the covering and care and love of God? We live our life thinking that a lot of things are missing in our life. And we want our life to be comfortable. And we want our life to be filled with good things. And there shouldn't be any discomfort. But the truth is, when the Bible talks about peace, it's not talking about where everything is comfortable and everything is cool and everything is nice so that you don't experience any discomfort in your life. When Bible talks about peace, when it's talking about shalom in Hebrew, It is talking about the peace that you feel despite the fact that you are experiencing a lot of turmoil and difficulties and discomfort. Psalm 23 was a psalm that was recited by many Christians who marched their way into the lion's den and into the gates of Colosseum, where they will face predators and gladiators. On their way into the Colosseum, into the cheering crowd, Christians have recited this psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And he leads me to the pasture and to the still water. Do you have this kind of relationship with God where when you experience discomfort, when there are great trials, that you still have shalom in your heart? That you do not experience life as something is lacking, but you can trust in the Lord despite the fact that there are trials and difficulties and discomfort. Later on, Psalm 23 was named Martyred Psalm by Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, because this psalm has provided comfort and peace and rest to many faithfuls, not when they're sitting in an air-conditioned room, but when they are sitting and facing the lions and their immediate death. How can David write a psalm like this when he himself has experienced so many troubles? That he was hiding in the caves and running away from the king that he has served, and he has faced many battles. How can he say that he is led to the green pastures and still waters and say, I shall not want? And then the literal translation of I shall not want is that I don't have anything lacking in my life. There is no lack. I do not experience my life as something is lacking, but surely there is something that is lacking in David's life, like a bed, security, family. But despite all of these things, David's experience of all those running and trials and difficulties, he writes, I will not experience life as something is lacking. The Lord will take me to green pastures and lay me beside still waters. When you and I think about still waters and pastures, we think of, Constable's painting of English meadow, where the whole entire field is covered with greenery, and there are trees, and there's flowing water, and there's just everything is lush. But if you understand this text from the context of David's life, you would understand that wilderness in Israel is not that at all. It's not what you and I see in a calendar. Israel is about 70% desert. And there are lush places for sure, but most of the places in the wilderness is barren, is bleak, is hot, is hostile, inhospitable, and there's always danger of bandits and predators lurking behind every dark corner. David's like the wilderness that David is thinking and talking about is not a wonderful place, but it's a place where there is not enough, or there's barely enough to go on, and you don't know what will happen to you the next day. Again, I ask you, how can David say that there's no lack in life when he is in the wilderness? How can someone like David find rest in the wilderness? It says, because the shepherd leads and guides and protects his life. That he has experienced a life where he met a shepherd in the wilderness. That he has been guided and protected by a good shepherd, despite the fact that the wilderness opposed danger and bleakness. When it says that he leads me to pasture, he's really talking about the hills that is facing the Mediterranean Sea, where the heat brings moisture into the mountain slope. And there's enough moisture to pop up a little bit of greenery and shrubs overnight, over the course of the week. And the shepherd would lead his flock into those places that he knows well, into the location where he knows that his flock will be taken care of. And he leads them so that they would have enough for that day. And the sheep who knows that if you follow the shepherd, that he will lead the flock into a place where there's food. The sheep recognizes the voice and the silhouette of the shepherd, and he begins to trust and follow that shepherd into the wilderness. There is enough for that day. But if you stick with the shepherd, there will always be enough for that day. The sheep does not have to overeat today because maybe tomorrow there will be a lack. No, the sheep just needs to get what it needs that day and trust the shepherd. And when the gate opens, you just have to follow the shepherd out of that gate every single day, and there will be food. The shepherd will lead his sheep into a place where there is rest. In addition to that, we see that the shepherd lays down his sheep in the still water. And again, what we kind of think of is a fairly large body of water where there is just serenity and there's no flow, and there's this reservoir of water that is readily available for the flock. It has been told to me by those who has been to Israel that when the leading cause of wildlife is sudden flooding in Israel, because although they have desert condition, that they experience torrential rain time to time, and what it was a little trickle of a still water just coming down the valley can all of a sudden, without any warning, turn into a massive flood. And any flock or animal that was drinking water from that place will be swept away and meet their watery grave. But it is the shepherd who sees the clouds in the distance, who sees the thunder and lightning and the gathering of the clouds and the pouring of the rain in the far off distance. So he knows what is coming because his watchful eyes is always on the lookout so that his flock may rest next to a still body of water without worrying about what might happen next moment. It is the wilderness that they found shepherd reliable, relational, loving, watchful, and caring. In addition to that, what David has experienced, as he says, as he walks through the valley of shadow of death, I shall not fear evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, there has been some scholarly work done on rod and staff, but typically a staff is a cane with a hook around it. And the shepherd would use that hook to grab onto the leg, the hind quarter leg or the front leg, to get the sheep out of the danger, to get the sheep out of the thickets and direct and guide and scoop out the sheep that has fallen. And the rod is a shorter stick that he wore around his belt with a blunt, a bigger object, like a ball at the end of it, where if a sheep gets ever bitten by a predator and it's been taken away, the shepherd would have to come in, grab it by its neck, the wolf's neck, and use that blunt weapon to get the wolf to let go of his flock. What David is saying is that as he walked through the darkness where he has no vision, where he's not sure what will happen next. The shepherd provides guidance and protection. I shared with you before that there was a village in Azerbaijan when they were looking for a shepherd, and several shepherds came for the job, and there were 3 or 4 men, and the villagers who shared the stable in the center of their village, and they put all their sheep in there, and they just needed one shepherd to look after the entire village, the flock of the entire village. And the test to see which shepherd that they would get was to get them to take off their shirt. First interview question was, how long have you been a shepherd? The first one will say 10. The next one will say 15 and 20 years. And they say, okay, so you have experience of doing this work. And the next thing that they ask the shepherd to do is to take off their shirt. And if they don't find a scar on your body from a wild predator, then you have failed. Because they know that you cannot be a shepherd without fighting a predator. And if you don't have any scar on you, that means you're either sleeping on your job or you don't care, and you care more about yourself. So the ultimate test for a shepherd is, do you have the scars to prove that you care about the flock that is under your leadership? David is saying, I met a shepherd. I have met a good shepherd who laid down his life, who is not afraid to come and rescue him when he is in danger. We see here in this text that David is no stranger to the wilderness, as you and I are no strangers to wilderness of our own. When we all experience the valley of shadow of darkness ourselves, we've also experienced having enemies in our life and where we are afraid. And of course, by enemies, I just mean that we really care about what other people think of us. We're fearful of what I don't have now in this valley, what I lack right now in this valley. And I don't know what future holds for me. And I really care about what other people say or might think about my lack that I perceive. And we get into this thought of, am I good enough? I'm just an imposter. And I can't get rid of these thoughts that tells me that you have failed. You lack so many things. Your job is not the job that you should have in your life at this moment. And instead of becoming a trusting sheep, what we become is that we want to be a goat. We want to be a lion. We have image of ourselves where we want to be someone who is independent, someone who can achieve, someone who can just go out without help of anyone else and live our life and make our life of our choosing. But the Bible calls us that we are to be a sheep. For in the wilderness, the sheep will find a shepherd. For in the wilderness is where you meet God. And that is a place where you will find rest for your soul. But only if you see God as your shepherd and you see yourself as a sheep. In Psalm 23, it says that you prepare a banquet before me and my cup overflows. When I read this verse, I think of the story of the parable of prodigal son, where the father is looking far away, looking for his wayward son. This text also reminds me of Abraham sitting under a tent in the hottest part of the day, waiting for a sojourner or strangers, just in case they walk by his tent, so that he can provide hospitality. Ancient Palestine world, and even now, is renowned for their hospitality. They don't start cooking when you knock on their door. They start cooking when they see you far off in the distance. Just like the story of the father and the prodigal son. Father is looking for you, waiting for you. He's looking for you, waiting for you, so that your cup may overflow. He wants to give your life in the wilderness so that you will not have fear of something is missing from your life. So that you will no longer fear what other people may say about you. Wilderness, brothers and sisters, is a place of radical trust. It's a place where you and I walk into and say, we will find a shepherd and I shall not want. He will give me what I need for this day. He will get me to stop fearing what other people might have to say about me. You and I are not created to be independent. You and I are not created to be a lion, because if you and I are that apex predator, then what you and I will find ourselves is in the cage of a circus in front of a lion tamer, doing tricks. If that is your vision of your Christianity, where you are in charge and you are powerful, then your God will always inevitably be a circus lion tamer. But if you say to yourself, I can't do this on my own, and I'm in the wilderness, and what God gives you is that he will be your shepherd, and you will have radical trust where you will experience your cup overflowing, that you will not experience something is missing in your life, and you will not be hesitant to walk into the valley of shadow of death. Did you know that in the Bible, especially in Hosea, the best time that God has ever experienced with Israel was not in the Garden of Eden. Honeymoon for God was not Garden of Eden, where everything was lush and everything was provided and everything was perfect and pristine. Honeymoon, the best time that God remembers, and his favorite memory, is not when they enter into the promised land. It's not when they cross the Red Sea. It's not when they experience prosperity and they finally conquer the land. But God says it was when he was in the wilderness with his bride Israel. And when they're a young bride, that God was with them in the wilderness. And for him, that was his honeymoon with his people. When Israelites trusted God in the wilderness, every day manna fell, and they went out to gather manna. Not more than what they need, and never lacking than what they actually need to feed themselves. And that radical trust was in the wilderness. And unless you are comfortable with being in the wilderness, and you're seeking not comfort, but peace and shalom of God, you will never meet the shepherd. And what is amazing about this very short psalm is that it says, you lead me through the righteousness for your name's sake. He's not rescuing you. The shepherd is not watching far away for torrential rain. He doesn't memorize the path and the courses where there are greeneries for his flock, because they are worthy, because they have done something wonderful. but he does so for his own namesake. It's telling us that God does this out of grace. Even though you're weak, even though you're anxious, even though you're skittish and afraid, and you really know, even at objective level, that you are not good enough, he's not giving you shalom and rest because you are good enough for his rest, but simply for his namesake, because he loves you and he cares for you. In the wilderness that you and I are in today, COVID has changed our economic and spiritual landscapes, and it will be like this for a long time. There are things that just will not be the same for a very long time because of this pandemic. This is also our wilderness, because in it, we are being tested. You can go through this time telling yourself that you're dumb and you're foolish and you need to pull yourself out of this mud. Get better, get smarter, work harder. And when you see that you fail to do that, and you just feel even worse because you're not there, and you know that you're not there, and you tried and you failed, and just cycle of you doubting yourself, falling deeper and deeper into despair, and sometimes, for some of us, falling deeper and deeper into sin. You can go through this time without a shepherd, or you can go through this time trusting that God will give you what you need, one day at a time. That you're not made or created to be a goat or a lion, but you're a sheep who will receive the shepherd's care. I would like to invite us to live as a sheep. Recognize your weakness. Surrender and admit all your failures and bring it to the cross. Tell Jesus what you are, and this is all that you are today. He will take that load and the burden off of you. Christ was also tested in the wilderness. And in that wilderness, as he was tempted by the devil, by Satan, he overcame his temptation through prayer and word. You can't just simply go through wilderness by saying, I will get through this. But you need the word of God, and you need prayer. Prayer that is honest, prayer that is frequent, prayer that is short but often, where you're being completely and totally honest about your burden and your concerns about your life. And you need to have this word of God in you. What I want to really propose to you, so that you can live as a sheep and you may meet the shepherd who laid down his life for you, so that you may live your life. For us to live as a sheep in the wilderness is to pray and to read the word of God. I know I've been harping on this for many years, but you must read and chew on the word of God, not as a magic formula to make you feel better, but to help you in your trial. Let Psalm 23 be your martyr song that gives you peace, not comfort. We're not with God. Oh boy, I hope we're still connected. Are we? Okay. This is the second power out today, brothers and sisters. As I was saying, that you need word of God to bring you shalom, and you're not reading the word of God to give you comfort. As I lived my life in my childhood without my mother, I would have given anything to have my mom ride next to me in that bus, rather than riding in air-conditioned bus that I was in. Do you want comfort? Or do you want to have relationship with God so that you may have true rest and true peace? Once the air condition breaks down in that bus, you will just have discomfort. Your peace and rest is contingent upon the air conditioner. And you can live your life in that way too. You will be okay as long as you have a job. You will be okay as you have a house. But what God is offering to us is to be a loving parent to us, to be a loving father, to be a loving shepherd who laid down his life for us, that we may traverse through our trials and difficulties. I pray that you will live as a sheep, and may he be your shepherd and give you peace and rest that you desperately need.